Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, 2,000 years ago, said there are no boy philosophers. Very good, sage remark. And there are no boy philosophers, because I know when I was young, I was very stupid. I said when I was a young person that I hoped that I would die when I was 75. Why 75? Because, well, by the 75, you have a good, quick heart attack, and that would save you all the infirmities of getting older. But there was a problem with that. When I became 75, I didn't want to leave this planet. When I got to 75, I thought, oh, let's try 80. And then I thought, well, why don't we try 85? And then why don't we try 90? And now in my 92nd year, I'm going to try for 95. But anyway, suppose you don't mind becoming in your 92nd year and you have all the infirmities that go along with it. How do you get there? Well, it isn't easy. You know, first of all, you've got to have good genetics, and we certainly can't pick our parents, as you know. Then you have to be lucky not to be killed in a car accident, no fault of your own. And thirdly, you have to have good common sense. And unfortunately, common sense has become a very uncommon commodity. So some people strike out on all three deals and don't even get close to 90 plus. But let's suppose you do get rid of all those three possibilities. What kind of traps can you fall into to stop you from getting to 90? And let's have the first slide. I've been a surgeon all my life, so I really know that surgical game. You know, I know all the good rules and all the bad rules of it. And I can tell you that one of the, Harvey Cushing, who was professor of neurosurgery at Harvard, one time said there's no such thing as minor surgery, but there are a hell of a lot of minor surgeons. And I can tell you, I've had 2 operations, but I've always had one by the best of the crop. But you might say, well, that's easy for you, Gifford Jones, because you know you're a doctor, you worked in hospitals all your life, you're a surgeon. And I haven't been a naturopath all my life. I've been a surgeon all my life to correct that situation. Then I got involved in natural medicine. But the point is, if you're ever going to have an operation, try to learn who is a nurse in a hospital. And if you have a friend who has a nurse in a hospital, that nurse can always go to a scrub nurse who works with doctors. You know, so they scrub up with them. They hand the instruments all the time, hour after hour, day after day to doctors. And I can tell you, you have to be a really dumb scrub nurse to not know who's good and who isn't. So always try to find that out, and you'll be in the best hands, and you'll decrease the number of complications and sometimes even death during surgery. The other thing to remember is always that you know the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, there's another saying that I wrote about recently, that even if it's partially broke, maybe don't fix it. Because of the men in the audience, 90% of hernias occur in men. And we used to say, well, if you got a hernia in a man, you got to get it fixed, because if you don't get it fixed, a little loop of bowel will slip into the hernia and intestinal obstruction and, a serious complication in surgery. But then they did a long series just a few years ago and followed several thousand men with hernias and did nothing, found out what happened. They only found out that 1% of people get the intestinal obstruction every year. And therefore, they're operating on 99 men that don't need it. So small hernias, not causing trouble, leave them alone. I've had 2 small hernias for 70 years. No problem. They're small ones and never get me into trouble. The other thing is, with all the ultrasounds that are being done these days, sooner or later someone has an ultrasound done that shows a gallbladder stone or a number of stones. We used to say, well, if you got stones in your gallbladder, better have it taken out, because one of those small stones will get caught in the small cystic duct that takes bile to the bowel, to the small intestine. You'll have a lot of pain, and again, emergency surgery will be required. But then they found out that, what about if you have a big stone? Well, the big stones can't get out. They're trapped there. They can't cause any trouble. So if someone says, look, we've done an ultrasound on you, and you've got one big stone that's not causing any trouble, leave it alone. Because what will happen, they will most likely bury you with it, or the crematorium will take care of it. Next slide. Now, the other thing, people are getting too much radiation these days. If your doctor says to you, I'm going to do a CT scan on your abdomen or on your chest because we don't know what's causing the pain, and we'll do a CT scan to find out for sure. How many of you realize that a CT scan is the same as me giving you a prescription and saying, go to the hospital tomorrow morning and have 500 routine x-rays done of your chest, or 1,000 dental films? Now, I think if I did that, you might say, 500, it's a lot of radiation, and it is a lot of radiation. So if a doctor says that to you, always ask him, can I get the same information from doing an MRI or a ultrasound rather than a CT scan? And CT scans have all that radiation. MRIs and ultrasounds have zero radiation. So in the future, it appears that about over 2 to 3% of all the malignancy that occur in North America will be from extra radiation. So always stay away from radiation like the plague. My dentist knows I don't want routine x-rays of my teeth year after year. If they do it every few years, fine, but not annually. Next slide. How many remember the cartoon character Pogo? I guess some of you do. Pogo made the remark that we've identified the enemy, and the enemy is us. And that is so true. Many of the diseases we're running into these days are diseases of lifestyle. And here's a guy that, is a disaster waiting to happen. He's overeating, he's got belly fat, which is the worst kind of fat. He's not exercising, he's smoking. Anyone who smokes these days should see a psychiatrist, because it's really a dumb habit. And the only good thing, is there only one good thing he's doing in the picture? He's having a beer. And if he has 1 or 2 beers a day, not a bad deal, because beer, low-cal beer, has only 60 calories in it. It's got lots of minerals, it's got lots of vitamins. In other words, beer in moderation is a good drink. And and since I'm in my 92nd year, and I always remember the advice, and I adhere to it every night in my life, with very, very few exceptions. I have an alcoholic drink. I was in the ship's surgeon for a while, so I have a rum and coke before the news every night with my wife. And alcohol in moderation is great. As Sir William Osler said, alcohol is for the elderly what milk is for the young. Pretty bright remark. He also had a wonderful way of treating the common cold. He would say, don't go into the drugstore and get all that junk. That isn't going to do you any good. You go to bed. And of course, when you have aches and pains, you feel, oh, it's so good to pull up the covers and go to bed, and you'll be better maybe in the morning. But Sir William Osler said you got to do 2 other things first. You got to put your hat on the bedpost, and then you also got to take a bottle of whiskey to bed with you. And all you do is just lie in bed there under the covers, take a little sip and a little sip and another little sip. When you see 2 hats, you stop. Next slide. Now, I've only seen one case of this, just one case. But why am I showing it to you? The average North American takes in 15 grams of fiber a day, and he should be taking in about 30 to 35. And taking in extra fiber does 2 things to you. It first of all helps you keep thinner. If I took this glass here and had drank it all and drank another glass, it doesn't have any fiber in it. No filling effect. Fiber has filling effect. And when you have filling effect, the glass of water can't say to my brain, the stomach is full. But if I have an apple here on the table, and then I got finished eating that apple, which is loaded with fiber, it's very unlikely I would want a second apple, because that apple tells my stomach, tells the brain that the stomach's full. So it will have some effect, not a big effect, but some effect in fighting the obesity epidemic. Secondly, high fiber diets keeps you from getting constipated. And and there's a recent study that shows that people who are constipated, that fecal material that you're having the large bowel remaining there longer, and if you happen to be eating a lot of packaged foods such as meats, and particularly, which have nitrates and nitrates in them, which are carcinogenic, that leaves them a longer time to be in the large bowel to cause cancer. So relieving yourself daily of that fecal material decreases the risk of colon cancer. Next slide, please. Now, a lot of people are going to die because they've had bad luck or they have bad genes, but millions and millions of other people are going to die from lack of common sense. And the three big epidemics we have today are the epidemic of obesity, the epidemic of type 2 diabetes, and heart attack. And there's a Gifford-Jones law that says one bad thing leads to another bad thing, another bad thing, and another bad thing. We're not in the days now where you die quickly of infectious disease, pneumonia, meningitis, etc. You die slowly of chronic disease. And obesity I was asked about a couple of weeks ago in a radio program, what did I think was going to happen to our healthcare system? I said, well, the quick answer is that I told him the story of the young boy who had a burning desire to work at the railroad station. So he went and applied for the job, and the station master said to him, well, you look like a nice, bright young lad, but, bad things can happen at the radio station. So let me give you a quiz. He said, suppose you're standing here, and you saw a train coming from the east. Then you saw another train coming from the west. And then to your horror, you found out that they were both on the same track, going at 100 miles an hour, and just a quarter of a mile apart. What would you do? Well, the one boy stood on one foot, then the other, and scratched his head. Oh, I know what I would do. I'd run and get my brother. The man said, why in the name of heaven would you get to your brother at such a crucial time? He said, because my brother's never seen a train wreck. In other words, those three things that I just mentioned, obesity, type 2, and heart disease, they're biggies. And they're going to cause a major train wreck. And unless we do something differently to our lifestyle, we're in a lot of trouble. One in 14 people in North America now has diabetes, type 2 diabetes. When I was at when I graduated from the Harvard Medical School 65 years ago, only 5% of people had lifestyle diabetes. The rest was genetic. Now it's a total reversal. In 65 years, 95% is due to lifestyle and 5% due to bad genes. We're doing a lot of bad things. Next slide. I think we'll quit that one, yeah. So let's talk about another bad pitfall, cardiovascular disease. Every 20 seconds, a heart attack occurs in North America, and every 37 seconds, someone dies of it. There are 500,000 bypass operations done every year. And if you have a heart attack, you've got about a 50% chance of getting to the hospital alive. So treat your heart, with tender, loving care. If I got tired right now, and it'd be a little embarrassing, I could lie down on this table and rest all my muscles, and I'm not going to die. But that heart beats day after day after day, every 24 hours, 100,000 times. I had to do that calculation 2 or 3 times. That's a lot of beats. And if you live to be 70 years of age, it beats 2.52 billion times. And now in my 92nd year, I'm afraid to do the count anymore for what it's going to come up with. But at any rate, it's a tremendously valuable and an amazing organ that it can do that without any rest. Now let's have the next slide. Which one of that? So anyway, up until now, I've been telling you a lot what has to do with me being a doctor and surgeon for 65 years, and a medical journalist for 40 years. But all the things that I'm going to talk to you about now come from being a medical journalist for 40 years. I didn't learn anything all of this at the Harvard Medical School. I've learned it being a medical journalist, and I think it has saved my life, which is important. Next slide. Now let's talk about the two big natural remedies, vitamin C and lysine. And I didn't know years ago that the high doses of vitamin C and lysine, if taken for a long period of time, could not only prevent but could reverse hardening of the arteries. And that really is a very revolutionary finding. And but before I go on, I must tell you another story so that you don't go home tonight and toss away all your cholesterol-lowering drugs. That's not the purpose of this talk. So let me tell you a story about the man who had one hell of a fight with his wife. You know, it was one of those baddies that he had never had before. And he called her every conceivable name in the book. And finally, before he slammed the door, he said, in addition to all the bad things I've said about you, you have for years and years and years been a lousy, lousy lover. And he left. And 24 hours later, as you would imagine, he got terribly guilty. And why did I say these nasty things to my wife when I really should not have done so? And he said, I'm going to go home and apologize. So he bought her a bunch of roses, and we're going to take out and wine and dine her that evening. When we arrived home around 4:30, she wasn't there. And he waited around and hadn't come in by 5:30. So he said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up and shower and shave, and by the time she comes back, then I'll apologize to her and we'll go out and have dinner. So anyway, he said, let's go upstairs. So he went upstairs and wandered into the bedroom, and to his utter sheer shock and surprise, he found his wife in bed with another man. And he really had nothing to say. He was just appalled at what he was seeing. But she was quite calm, cool, and collected, not worried at all. She just looked up at him and said, darling, 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 I decided I should get a second opinion. So what we're telling you today is a second opinion about what I believe saved my life, namely high doses of vitamin C and lysine. Next slide. Now you might say that if what I'm saying you today is so damn good, you know, why isn't this the headlines of every newspaper in the world? And it should be. It's monumental finding, but it isn't. It's not there for 2 or 3 reasons. First of all, marketing 101. Last year, all the pharmaceutical companies that manufacture cholesterol-lowering drugs made $30 billion. That's 30,000 million. Whatever way you look at it, it's one heck of a lot of money. And I'm telling you, if I was the president of Pfizer and these other companies that make it, and I'm making that kind of money, I want to keep my job, make 31 billion the next year. So they're making that kind of money. They can also spend hundreds of millions of dollars brainwashing people like you, brainwashing family doctors, and they would brainwash me too. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that if I had not been a medical journalist, I would right now be taking a cholesterol-lowering drug. No doubt about it. I'm not that smart. And I know I would have been brainwashed too. So that really, it's sort of sad that so many people have been seduced by money. But mind you, you can seduce people in a lot of ways with money. Next slide. It's also produced a disease called cholesterol. When I do meet and greets at health food stores, people are terrified of going off cholesterol-lowering medication. They think they're going to die. The other thing is, next slide, that for years and years and years, doctors have been very reticent about changing their mind on old ideas. And just to give you a good couple of examples, when the first obstetrical hospital in Vienna was opened 150 years ago, Vienna was the medical, mecca of the world. Doctors from North America went to Vienna to study medicine. And in those days, it's hard to believe that 1 in 6 women who went into the obstetrical hospital in the University Hospital in Vienna in those days didn't come out with a bouncing baby boy or girl. She came out in a coffin. What was happening, doctors were going from the autopsy area up to the delivery floor, not washing their hands, delivering a baby. And women were dying of puerperal sepsis. When Semmelweis, one of the professors, said, I wonder if I wash my hands, it would make a difference. And we started washing his hands. Practically, the mortality rate on his part of the hospital went down to practically 0. When he told his friends about this, namely his own colleagues, you would think they would have said to him, bloody good. You know, what a miracle. And they didn't know about bacteria in those days, but you would think they would have thought, I will start washing my hands too. But what happened? They drove him off the hospital staff. They took away his professorship. He became depressed and died in an insane asylum in Vienna many years later. Going back 250 years, when doctors died of scurvy, Dr. James Lind, who was a naval surgeon and had a little bit of lime juice on board, said, I wonder if I give lime juice to a small number of sailors, since I've only got a small amount of lime juice. I wonder if that would stop scurvy. And he found it did stop scurvy, and none of them died. And in those days, it's hard to remember or realize that on long sea voyages, not just a few sailors died of scurvy, 90% of the crew died, and only 10% remained to come home. So anyway, when he told his colleagues in London about it, the bureaucracy in London, it took them another 60 years before they issued lime juice to sailors, and in the meantime, thousands of sailors died. Now you might think, well, Gifford Jones, that happened 150 years ago and 250 years ago. It doesn't happen now. Surely it can't happen now because we're the most tuned-in society in the world. Everyone's got iPhones and so forth, and word goes around the world so quickly. But let me tell you another story of Alan Smith. Alan Smith was a farmer in New Zealand, and he liked fishing, to go fishing with his buddies. And they had a good time fishing, then returned back and found out at that point that one of them, namely Alan Smith, was not feeling very well. Nausea, vomiting, headaches, abdominal pain. Became so ill he had to go into hospital. And I think you'll see from that slide that he's got more than a headache. He's acutely ill. Finally, he becomes unconscious. And finally, the doctors say, you have no way of curing your father and husband, because the diagnosis is swine flu virus, and we have given him every antibiotic in the book, and he's still going to die. We want to pull the plug. And they would have taken off life support if one of the sons had read something about Linus Pauling and the use of intravenous vitamin C in curing viral diseases. So they said, yes, you can remove life support, but before you do that, you've got to give intravenous vitamin C in large doses. The New Zealand doctors said, we won't do it. And they said, we won't do it because vitamin C is useless and is not part of the protocol in treating swine flu virus. It was only 2 days later when the son arrived with his lawyer, and doctors never like to see a lawyer. And the lawyer said, you know, you've got two choices. You can remove life support now, and Alan Smith is going to die, or you can give vitamin C and prove it's worthless, and then remove life support, and no one is going to sue you. But we will sue you, 3 doctors, and we will sue the hospital if you don't do it. So with great reluctance, they gave him 500,000 milligrams. Now, if you're taking vitamin C, and you're taking just a tablet, you're getting about 250 milligrams a day. They gave him 500,000 milligrams intravenously the first day, and large doses in succeeding days. Now, the next slide shows that the lungs on the left-hand side of the picture shows why Alan Smith is not feeling very well and comatose. His lungs are full of fluid. No wonder he's not well. A few days later, lo and behold, his lungs start to clear. They're not perfect, but they're certainly better than they were before. And a few days later, the lungs go right back to normal. And a few days later, Alan Smith comes out of his coma. A few days later, they remove life support. And a week later, he goes home alive and well. Now, one would think in this enlightened age that the New Zealand doctors would have said, no, wonderful. I'm going to go and read about the use of intravenous vitamin C. And they could easily have done it. 50 years earlier, they had written all about intravenous vitamin C. And you can go home tonight. Don't believe me. Go to the internet and write in the words Dr. Richard Klenner, Klenner, and it's all there to see. And I bet if I went to any doctor in this city right now and said, can intravenous vitamin C do all the things I've told you, namely cure meningitis, encephalitis, measles, mumps, chicken pox, and snake bite, and polio, and they'd say, you're crazy. But it can do all of those things, and yet it's collecting dust. So that it shows how, when you take a dramatic situation like this, that is where doctors are reticent to accept it as fact, you can understand why it's very, very difficult for doctors to accept that large doses of vitamin C and lysine can reverse hardening of the arteries, because after all, it's not very dramatic. If I drop dead in the next 4 minutes, or a friend of yours later on drops dead in 4 minutes, you'll never forget it. It's a very shocking affair. But in the 10, 20, 30, or 40 years up to having a heart attack with the atherosclerosis, not dramatic at all. So that it's very, very hard to convince doctors that this really makes sense. Next slide. Where are we? So one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me in my life was I ran into Linus Pauling and interviewed him about 25 years ago. And one of the things that Linus Pauling told me when I first interviewed him, Linus Pauling was not a doctor, but he was a 2-time Nobel Prize winner, brilliant man, and a wonderful, wonderful gentleman. I've interviewed scientists all over the world as a medical journalist, and I can tell you, there's no one that has made more effect in my life and been such a wonderful interview as Linus Pauling. I've interviewed him twice. And he told me during the first interview, which none of my professors at the Harvard Medical School had told me, namely that animals have always made vitamin C, and humans don't. Humans lost that genetic ability to manufacture vitamin C eons and eons ago through a genetic mishap. And it was Pauling's theory that due to that genetic mishap, we were having the epidemic of cardiovascular disease. He also told me that if you have a dog, that dog will manufacture 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, day after day after day. If, on the other hand, that dog gets into a fight with a neighbor's dog or becomes infected, it will immediately, nature will tell that dog to start manufacturing not 5,000 milligrams a day, but 100,000. And that's why Alan Smith got better. He was under stress. Whenever you're under stress from surgery or any other situation, the stress really eats up the vitamin C out of your blood. So all the more reason, if you are in a stressful situation, to take high doses of vitamin C. At any rate, he told me that. And then about 10 years later, next slide, I ran into a Dr. William Stebbins in Singapore. And after his talk, we got chatting. And he said to me, you know, Linus Pauling is right. Stebbins was a pathologist, and he said, you know, the reason that Pauling is right is because the pressure in the coronary veins is much, much greater than the pressure in the big toe. And that 100,000 beats day after day after day in 24 hours puts great pressure on the coronary arteries. And when, as Linus Pauling theorized, that all that pressure causes small cracks in the coronary arteries, and that's where blood clot occurs. So anyway, once again, I put that in my brain and went back into the operating room and did surgery. I should have started taking vitamin C, but didn't. Anyway, the next slide. So I forgot to mention that Linus Pauling also said that we all are living in an element of subclinical scurvy. We don't get scurvy because, why don't we get scurvy? It only takes 10 milligrams of scurvy to prevent it. And you get 10 milligrams of scurvy in an orange. So that no wonder people are not dying of scurvy these days. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Now, Leonardo da Vinci made that wise remark 500 years ago. Nature never breaks her own laws, and I always remembered that. I don't know why, but it always rang a bell in my brain. And this became very important to me because on a Sunday morning, 17 years ago, I was sitting writing a column in Toronto. Birds were singing and the sun was shining, and you know, God was in heaven. One of those days, and I was about to go to Buenos Aires to see my eldest son married to an Argentinian lady. And in about 20 seconds, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. I was having a heart attack, admitted to the Toronto General Hospital. And it was a very serious heart attack because my blood pressure went so low that they had to put in what they called an intra-aortic balloon into the big artery, and pretty serious stuff. and to pump it, give my blood pressure going, and in 24 hours, I damn near died. So that it left a lasting impression on you, of course. But anyway, I luckily survived the heart attack, and then had triple bypass done. And at that point, of course, all my cardiologist said, you've had a serious heart attack, and you're going to be dead in a couple of years unless you take cholesterol-lowering medication. And if I hadn't been a medical journalist, I would have done it. But I always remembered Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci said, what Leonardo da Vinci was saying, don't mess around with nature. It's taken eons and eons to know how much blood cholesterol you need, how much potassium you need. If you have too much potassium, you die. Too little potassium, you die. And there's very fine borderlines between all the things that are going on in our body every day. And every day, 30,000 metabolic reactions are taking place all the time. So I knew that cholesterol was an important part of the body. It's a part of every living cell. 25% of it is in the brain. In other words, we would die without cholesterol. As a matter of fact, it manufactures the thyroid, not the thyroid, but the steroid hormones, vitamin D. I also was seeing patients who had been put on cholesterol-lowering drugs with getting problems with their liver, their kidney, increased incidence of cataracts and muscle pain. Do we have a slide of Dr. Nass? Well, I also knew there are many myths about cholesterol, namely that most of the people 50% of the people who go into a hospital with a coronary attack have normal blood cholesterol. In other words, your blood cholesterol really doesn't mean too much. You can have a high cholesterol and not have a heart attack. You can have a low cholesterol and have one. So I decided not to have cholesterol-lowering medication, and I decided to do what Dr. Pauling was doing. He was taking 20,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day and 5,000 of lysine. I decided to split the difference. So I started taking 20 tablets of vitamin C daily and 5,000 of lysine. Didn't like it, but as each year went by and I was still on this planet, I thought maybe it's not a bad idea and maybe I made the right decision. But one thing I didn't know, and which would have been very important in making that decision, which only has come out in the last couple of years, that if you take a cholesterol-lowering drug, you've got a 25 to 50% chance of developing type 2 diabetes. And do we have a slide of that? Okay. So really, when the television news at night tells you you're going to have a heart attack if you don't take a cholesterol-lowering medication, they should also tell you that you've got a 25 to 50% chance of developing type 2 diabetes. And remember, as I told you earlier, if you have type 2 diabetes, you have a 50% chance of having a heart attack. So with millions and millions of people taking cholesterol-lowering medication, it means millions and millions of people are going to develop type 2 diabetes, and millions of people are going to have a heart attack. So I think the very thing they're trying to prevent may be increasing the number of heart attacks over a period of time. Next slide. So anyway, I've been taking 30 tablets of vitamins of C and lysine over the last 17 years, and would have been continuing to do that until about 3 years ago, when I luckily, by chance, ran into Dean Parks of Preferred Nutrition, small pharmaceutical company. And when I told him what I was doing, he said, well, I think we can make a powder of those tablets. And about 5 months later, Medi-C Plus was born. So I'm very, very grateful to Preferred Nutrition and Dennis and all the people associated with this company for manufacturing this product, which I think has not only kept me alive, but made it a lot easier by taking just scoops of powder every day. And I can tell you, taking 30 pills a day is no fun, along with maybe some of the other pills you have to take too. Next slide. Next slide. Now I would have wondered right to this talk whether I was doing the right thing, and if I hadn't 3 years ago ran into Dr. Sidney Bush by chance. I read in a rather obscure medical journal that Sidney Bush of Hull, England, an optometrist, had done an interesting experiment. He was fitting patients with contact lenses as he was an optometrist. And as every eye doctor knows, if you fit enough people with contact lens, some people will get an infection under the lens, and what will happen, they given antibiotics and normally are okay. But if you look in the literature, some people lose an eye from having contact lens. So anytime you either have an operation or add something to your body that is not normally there, there's always a risk. And that big risk can be sometimes losing an eye. So he thought, since he had done a lot of reading about Linus Pauling, he said, I wonder if I give vitamin C and lysine to people before I fit them with the contact lens. I wonder if it will stop the infections underneath the lens. So he decided to give 6,000 milligrams of C and 5,000 of lysine each day. But he did one important thing before he did that, and for this he really should get the Nobel Prize. He took a picture of the back part of the retina. Next slide. The retina is the only part of the eye where you can see arteries and veins. So that when the doctor looks at your eye with the ophthalmoscope, what he's looking for is whether you have cataracts and other problems in the eye. But really what he's doing, he's looking at the arteries at the back of the eye to see whether or not you have atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. Because it's atherosclerosis that kills a lot of us. Good to have good rubber, a rubber that is nice and pliant, that doesn't give you hypertension, but when you have hard rubber, the heart has to push hard through it. You get hypertension and then lots of problems. And people who are diabetic are notorious for getting atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease. So you notice the arteries on the right-hand side are much paler, much smaller, and carrying less oxygen and less blood to the retina than than they were previously. Now that doesn't happen overnight. Dr. Bush has looked at literally hundreds of patients since that time, and he has found out that when you start taking vitamin C and lysine in high doses, that it starts working in about 6 months' time. So it's not like Drano that you put down the kitchen sink and immediately it's unplugged. It's a slow molecular process. So I can tell you, the worst thing you could do, and if any Scotch in the audience, and I'm partially Scotch, I don't like spending money for nothing. And you're absolutely wasting your money if you buy Medi-C Plus, take it for 2 or 3 months and stop. Go and have a good meal or do something else. But don't waste it, because 2 or 3 months won't do you a bit of good. You've got to be like me, be on it for 17 years and get the benefit of it during that time, slowly, and each year getting better and better and better. So that what Bush did at the end of the year, he took another picture of the retina. And it was only at the end of the year that he found out that not only was he not finding patients who were developing infections under the contact lens, but for the first time in history, as far as we know, he had shown that atherosclerosis, or hardening the arteries, can gradually dissolve away. Now that really is a monumental, amazing finding, and it should not be collecting dust, but it is. And it's collecting dust because, as I mentioned earlier, the pharmaceutical companies have billions of dollars at their disposal to counteract that message. So that's basically the message I wanted to give you today. And remember, when you go home tonight, remember remember these photos. Remember that I bet my life on it. Remember that you're being seduced by a lot of money by the pharmaceutical companies, and that a simple solution, namely taking high doses of vitamin C and lysine, can do the same thing, cheaper, effective, and literally save your life from a coronary attack or a stroke. But it's a hard message to get through, and I think we got time, I hope, for just a few questions. And I find the question and answer period is sometimes the most fun. So if you have a question, please let me know. Yes. Then. Basically the same thing, and then say the reason for lysine is if you're building a house of cement, you add steel rods to the cement to make the concrete stronger. The addition of lysine to vitamin C makes the arterial wall stronger. So not only are you keeping the opening of the artery open, but you're keeping the arterial wall strong. So if you have a weak artery in the brain, it won't rupture, causing a brain attack or stroke. You get the double benefit that way. And remember also, when you take vitamin C, remember there's 60,000 miles. If you dissect the human body and lie the arteries and veins end to end, they will stretch for 60,000 miles, twice around the circumference of the world. So that you're getting the benefit not only to your coronary arteries, you're getting the benefit to all the arteries throughout your entire arterial system. Yes, yes. What was that? Where can you get these big doses? You have to know a doctor who is who is giving intravenous vitamin C. There's a Dr. Huey in Toronto that gives, Dr. Hui, that gives intravenous vitamin C.
What about the liposome vitamin C?
Nothing wrong with it. It's good. It's good. Matter of fact, it's a good point, because if you want to take over, say, 6,000 or 10,000 milligrams a day, liposomal is good. It doesn't give you diarrhea that like vitamin C does. If you start taking Medi C Plus in one scoop contains 2,000 milligrams. I take 5 scoops a day, but for most people who haven't had a heart attack, 1 scoop twice a day, namely 4,000 milligrams, will suffice. If you had a heart attack, diabetes, or overly obese, it's better to take 1 scoop 3 times a day, or 6,000 milligrams of vitamin C. If I had my life to live over again and knowing what I live now, I'd do a lot of things. The one thing I would, certainly in my teens, I would start taking vitamin C, yes, for sure.
And then just like, I don't have any heart disease that I know of. Are you suggesting that I should just be taking prevention?
Well, when I say everyone should take high doses of vitamin C and lysine, it looks like I'm just promoting it for profit, and that's really not true. The fact is, if I had my life to live over again, I would start taking it early. Everyone should start taking it, because if you're not an animal, you're never going to make vitamin C and lysine. And that's the only way you're going to get it. Some people say, well, can I take vitamin C since I'm on a cholesterol-lowering drug and I'm terrified of going off it? Can I take Medi-C along with it? You can. Common sense tells you that, because if you go home tonight and have a dinner of say, meat or chicken, there's a lot of lysine in chicken, and that's going to have no effect on your cholesterol-lowering drugs. Get up in the morning and take a glass of orange juice, vitamin C. That also is not going to have any effect. So when you take Medi-C, all you're doing is increasing the doses of vitamin C and lysine to an effective level. Ask your doctor. If it were me, I would gradually go off them and go on, but take Medi-C at the same time. But really, I'm not your doctor, and I can't tell you that. Yes.
I read on the bottle of lysine that you should stop taking it every
Oh yes. That's a damn bureaucratic regulation, and you are forced to put that on, and it's crazy, because what you have to do, as I've said earlier, you've got to keep taking it for years to get the benefit. So asking your doctor, who won't know about it anyway at the end of 6 months, it's useless exercise, and I think they're trying to get that off the bottle. I think so. Oh, totally unnecessary. Totally, it's crazy. And if you're going to have an operation, the doctor more likely will tell you, stop vitamin C before the surgery. It's also crazy, because you're under stress for surgery. You should be taking big doses before you go into surgery. And as soon as you get through the anesthetic, you should start taking more big doses, because your body's under stress, and that's when it needs it.
Is it a myth that vitamin C irritates the stomach?
Say that. Yeah, yeah. Vitamin. Some people say I can't take Medi C or vitamin C because it's acidic. It is slightly acidic, but it means you'll get less kidney stones because most kidney stones are dissolved in an acidic medium. But the point is, the amount of acid in the vitamin C and lysine is about 1/50th of the hydrochloric acid in your stomach. So it really it is more psychological than saying I can't take it. But anyway, if someone says I really can't take it, all they have to do is with 1 scoop of Medi C, put half a scoop of baking soda. It makes it a totally neutral solution, neither acid nor basic, and it's no problem. Yeah, maybe go to this side of the room. Can you hear someone back there? And incidentally, I'll be at the 158 booth after this. So anyone who wants to come by, I'd be happy to. I'll be there for a couple of hours, so be happy to talk with anyone. Yes, you. I. Yes, you can. When you're taking Lipitor, you can still take vitamin C and lysine. Yeah, at the same time. Yeah, of course. What's that? What? Right. Good-looking blonde. What do you want?
Yeah. So the last question, because we'll have to.
Yes. Yes. All right. Right. You. Yes, to make the arterial wall stronger. Yes.
And the vitamin C as
Keep the arteries open. Yes. Thank you for coming.